Oh no, they haven't.
Do you have any idea of how many highly skilled man-hours over a 3-day period have gone into producing this dish, which is brought to your table at the zenith of its powers, its taste, flavor, textures, temperature, at the peak of perfection, and without tasting it, you call for salt?
They did.
Your salt, sir. I hate you with a passion you can only dream of.
Lenny Henry is chef tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC1.
Bon appetit.
Door.
Comedy with One Foot in the Grave, Sunday at 8:55 on BBC1.
After MASH on BBC2 now, the temperature rises at 9:25 for episode 1 of The Mushroom Picker, when mushroom-mad Kostya seduces an impressionable English girl with passion vodka and pickled cucumbers. In half an hour on BBC1, Clive James remembers the famous faces of the 50s, including Elvis Presley, Grace Kelly and Marilyn Monroe. First, the news with Martin Lewis at 9 o'clock.
The government reverses a key part of its defence cuts. Frontline units get an extra 5,000 troops. The Defence Secretary says it's because of significant new commitments around the world. Labour says the government got its sums wrong. And the Prime Minister has hinted that the unemployed might have to do community work in return for their dole money. Good evening. The government has changed its mind about the size of the defence cuts it ordered 2 years ago. The Army is to be allowed 5,000 more infantrymen for frontline units than originally planned. It means that 2 regiments will escape the axe. The planned mergers between the Royal Scots and the King's Own Borderers and the Cheshire and Staffordshire regiments have been cancelled. The Defence Secretary called it a small but sensible adjustment because of additional battalions being deployed in Northern Ireland and a trebling of Britain's contribution to UN peacekeeping tasks. Labour called it a panic measure, a form of crisis management which was no way to run an army.
The Staffords, here training just before today's announcement, are now one of the 4 regiments to be spared from a programme of cuts that's attracted mounting criticism within the army and on the backbenches.
Elevation 1170.
There's growing evidence that infantry units are being overstretched, that they're away from their families for too long. Clearly, the general's protests have struck home. This afternoon in the Commons, the Defence Secretary Malcolm Rifkind recognised the pressure, announcing the results of a special study that began 6 months ago with the latest new commitment for the army in Bosnia.
I have consulted the Chief of the General Staff and my other colleagues on the Army Board of the Defence Council. After considering all of the reductions currently underway or planned, it is our unanimous view that the amalgamations of the Cheshire Regiment and the Staffordshire Regiment and of the Royal Scots and the King's Own Scottish Borderers should not now proceed.
The opposition welcomed the reprieve but described it as a panic measure when what was needed was a full defence review.
This form of crisis management is no real way to run an army. And if the government have got their sums wrong as regards the infantry, how can we trust them to have got the figures right overall?
But the government is adamant that the basic shape of its defence cuts is right and will continue. The only concession or U-turn being that the army won't be reduced by quite as much as planned. The army's numbers are falling while its commitments around the world show every sign of growing. Although the army's strength in Germany is being cut by more than half, its commitment to Northern Ireland remains as large as ever, and troops are still deployed in places as far afield as Belize, Cyprus and Hong Kong. But it's the new commitment of 2,400 men to Bosnia and the prospect of perhaps twice that number being sent there in the future that put the army under the greatest stress. The battalion in Bosnia, the Cheshires, is another of those reprieved today, to the delight of campaigners against the cuts. They claim that under pressure from this crisis in former Yugoslavia, the government has corrected its past mistakes, though even now there are worries about future commitments.
I think in the long term